Mhm. All right, everybody. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah. Um, Today we're actually gonna do tafsir for the ayat that we had been doing. وَلَوْ جَعَلْنَاهُ مَلَكًا لَجَعَلْنَاهُ رَجُلًا وَلَبَسْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ مَا يَلْبِسُونَ. So, and then we also went all the way وهو القاهر فوق عباده وهو الحكيم الخبير قل أي شيء أكبر شهادة والله شهيد قل الله شهيد بيني وبينكم. And we talked about one, the psychology of الداعية. We talked about that. We also talked about the philosophy, the, let's say, the tactic that a lot of the disbelievers come in, and whether we talked about the different things that the ayat are basically using, the different, what today we would call it as a, let's say, a nice wording for a certain philosophy, whether we're talking about the cosmological argument, the theological argument, and certainly the other arguments out there that are discussed. But we also talked about how that is displayed in Surah Al-An'am. Remember that one? So we said the surah displays the evidences, but today they might have a fancy name in philosophy to talk about that. And certainly, it's so interesting to see how within just these ayat, you could see the grounding for, or the basis at least, for the philosophy in speaking and certainly directing the arguments and the words and the evidences. And the people that deny Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the people that have a misunderstanding on who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. In other words, whether it's in al-uluhiyya or in al-rububiyyah. At the same time, it has this tadrib, or this discipline, or this, let's call it, empowerment for the believers on what kind of a psychology, in the midst of all the different cornering that they might be receiving from the disbelievers, and how many times, whether it's using a mockery as a method, or probably cornering as a method, or sometimes a threat and threatening the people, whether it's with losing their grades if they're in class, for example, or probably not getting maybe the credits that they're looking for, or maybe the CV, or maybe the job, or maybe the promotion, or whatever it is. And without us realizing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us, listen, this is going to be a tactic that they'll use against you. Don't fall for it, and hold on to your identity, because you want to remember, قُلْ إِنِّي أَخَافُ إِنْ عَصَيْتُ رَبِّي. You want to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the consideration for the akhirah is supposed to be your main focus, your main direction, your main place of that awareness, which will create a mindfulness, let's say, of courage, a mindfulness of perseverance, and this identity of strength and power no matter what. And that's what it means to be Muslim. So here we go. قُلْ إِنِّي أَخَافُ إِنْ عَصَيْتُ رَبِّي. I'm not afraid, not for my rizq, because I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that gives the rizq, and I'm not afraid of you threatening me to probably end my life or whatever it is, because I recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that I connect to, and He's the power that basically goes beyond all. And my yusraf anhu yawma idin faqad rahima, and letting us know that the main concern is really getting into the embracement. In other words, to really qualify for the embracement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. That's the first thing that I would like to get qualified for. And of course, we went in certain details that now, وَإِن يَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُ. In terms of evil, we'll talk about that later on, but I thought it would be good to go into Tafsir al-Qurtubi. So I know that all you see is Arabic, but I will be breaking down the words for you. And the reason why we go to Tafsir al-Qurtubi, just remember that one, is because it's important to see what the books of Tafsir were saying and how we can go through, let's say, a scholarly review. So many times the tafsir that I would give, yes, it's an inspiration looking at more of mawdu'i kind of thing, more of a, I guess, an inspiration, trying to connect different ideas together, trying to make the Quran's ayat accessible to you in the situations that we're living in right now, and how we can bring about the wordings that the Quran in its classical form to being something that you would also put in the context of our times as well. So, I'm trying to bring in both sides, but I think it's very important to go to the classical tafsir to make sure that we are getting in and embedding, let's say it that way, embedding the different inputs that the scholars of tafsir had mentioned in taking consideration whether the Arabic language or whether we're speaking about the different qira'at or perhaps the different grammatical I guess the different grammatical wordings and all the different grammatical alternatives that sometimes will come in Lugha Arabiya, and certainly the etymology as well. So those are important things, and certainly the different mufassirin and their inputs are very important for us to make sure that we are understanding the ayat not only from a bird's view, kind of like an outside, don't just zoom out, but you really need to zoom in as well to really see in scrutiny what are we looking at. So let's go into these treasures and dig deep and see what Al-Qurtubi was saying. So I highlighted what I thought was actually the most important note for us to perhaps see and scrutinize, but that's not the most important, that's not the only thing, but just wanted to highlight those important notes. وَلَوْ نَزَّلْنَا عَلَيْكَ كِتَابًا فِي قِرْطَاسٍ. So here we go. Let's go right there. وَلَوْ نَزَّلْنَا عَلَيْكَ كِتَابًا فِي قِرْطَاسٍ, right here. So this is ayah 7, and I think that's where we left off at with تفسير القرطبي. Okay, let's see. ولو نزلنا عليك ولو نزلنا عليك كتابا في قرطاس فلمسوه بأيديهم. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have sent down a book that is in قرطاس. القرطاس is more of the actual manuscript, the actual script at least that is written in something, and they would have touched it. The disbelievers would have said that this is apparent and clear magic. Okay, so who are these words directed at? Number one, وَلَوْ نَزَّلْنَا يَا Muhammad. So, O Muhammad, if we had revealed, so that is the inference, therefore, as is this an assumption that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was putting forward, or is this something that the disbelievers themselves were saying, well, this is what we want you to do. This is what would make us become believers. And they were putting forward that if you were to bring down right before our eyes the book coming from the heavens, right there from the sky, so we could actually see it, so we could touch it. And if that is done right before our eyes, we'd be becoming believers. And this ayah was in response to their request, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically responds to it, that if the book was actually revealed in that way, and if it was revealed onto you with basically an angel bringing it down, and they were to even see it, that at the end at the end, of course, they would be still insisting to disbelieve because they'll find a way to create a narrative in order to say, well, whether they will say this is mere magic, in other words, bring that accusation that this is coming from an evil motive or from an evil source, etc. So they will find a way. In other words, this is to expose that the disbelievers, that disbelief is not about finding a miracle as much as it is wanting to find a way to only put their interpretation basically on top of everything, and therefore they're willing to reject every single point or every single truth that stands right before their eyes. They're willing to reject it, and they are not ready themselves to accept the truth because they don't want to accept it. Because they don't want to accept the truth, because they also understand that if they are to accept the truth, that there is going to be some effort to be implemented on ground, and they just don't want to put the effort. And this is extremely important to keep in mind, because without us realizing, many times as Muslims, we could see, and sometimes a very common thing, that people would come in and say, well, yes, I'm Muslim, but I struggle with this and I struggle with that. And without them realizing that these struggles, if you are still struggling in with the basics on your religion, how much of Islam are you really embracing? How long will this struggle continue for? And will this struggle then overcome your heart, perhaps, and take you out of the fold of Islam? And this is extremely scary, because the main struggle that the disbelievers were struggling with is really the motive. Their motive, their drives were really the main obstacle, that they wanted to change the interpretation, change the truth, because they didn't want to uh, go for applying the truth, because they knew it was going to be something that they would have had to give up on a lot of their dunya. And keep that in mind, Muslims, that in order to be connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to remember the word Allahu Akbar, that you are willing to sacrifice a lot of things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what it means. That's what it means. Rib'i ibn Amir. Rib'i ibn Amir, although the story is not fully authentic, but the story is mentioned in the books of Sirah. Okay. But the books of Sirah, just a note, the books of Sirah, they didn't undergo the same scrutiny that the books of Hadith went through. What does that mean? When you look at the books of Hadith, we would find a quote for the Prophet ﷺ, and it has a chain of narration. We're able to scrutinize the chain of narration. We're able to scrutinize the wording. We've got other reports where we could compare to make sure that this reference or this quote basically is supported by other witnesses to support that this really was mentioned by the Prophet ﷺ. When it comes to Sirah, the situation is rather different. So it was scholars that wanted to document some of the stories or some of the events, and they would document it, like Ibn al-Athir or probably other scholars of Sirah, and they'll document it. And with that documentation, they didn't take in consideration the authenticity and how true how true was that reference? How truthful was it? And how authentic is it? So they would, kind of think of it as journalist work, okay? But the journalist work sometimes falls under, uh, falls under, uh, yes, strict scrutiny, and other times it's falling under that I want to be the first to tell the story. So then they'll write the story. And other journalists would basically be the ones to enjoy just writing, whether it's for the sake of writing, like for the sake of writing, I would say just like al-Maghazi for al-Waqidi, writing stories just because they enjoyed writing the stories. True or not true was not of their concern. Okay. But yeah, at least I have the story written because it basically gives, let's say, entertainment, and it gives it spice into the story. So you'll find some books like al-Maghazi al-Waqidi, which is loved by the Orientalists, okay, because it has a lot of spices in it. And what I mean by spices metaphorically, of course. Now, one thing, the story that was mentioned, not in Maghazi al-Waqidi, but in other resources, Rib'i ibn Amir was not interviewed per se, but it was a direct meeting between Rib'i ibn Amir, who was not necessarily the head of the army, the Muslim army, because the head of the Muslim army at the time was Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. Okay. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas basically sends Rib'i ibn Amir as a deputy. And this deputy was to discuss political, military terms with Rustam. Who's Rustam? So Rustam was the head of the army, okay, for Kisra, who was the king of Persia. Okay, do we get that? Do we have that in place? So Rib'i ibn Amir goes and meets with Rustam, who is the deputy, basically. Both deputies are now meeting with each other and basically communicating on the details of the army, etc. But he asked them a question, and he said, well, what are you guys actually fighting for? What is this all fight about? Why are you guys doing this anyways? What are you for? What are you aiming at? What are you looking for? And it was said that he responded in short, and remember, there's an interpreter, but in short, he said, ابتعثنا الله لنخرج العباد من عبادة العباد إلى عبادة رب العباد. He said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent us. Now, this isn't sent us, to mean the type of, divine sending, but that sent with us, that is the message, and that's what we're carrying. We're carrying a legacy, the Prophet's legacy to the world. And what it contains in it is that we would free the people from worshiping people to worshiping the Lord of the people. وَمِنْ ضِيقِ الدُّنْيَا إِلَى سِعَةِ الْآخِرَةِ. And from the narrowness of this life to the vastness of the hereafter. I absolutely love this quote. Absolutely. Even though we don't necessarily have an authentic reference and resource that let's say 100% prove that that's the exact quote, but it was mentioned in a lot of the different books of Sirah. And what I like about it is the short phrase, to how he, as a deputy, was explaining that we're not seeking to take over people's resources. We're actually here to help people find the path to what brings them resources, to give, okay, one, to give them the vision, the understanding of this life, to carry the legacy and give them the freedom from worshiping people to worshiping the Lord of the people. And that's basically freedom right there. And two, ضيق الدنيا إلى سعة الآخرة. And ضيق الدنيا, whether ضيق الدنيا, in other words, the narrowness of this life, whether we're speaking about injustice or whether we're speaking about people's focus on entertainment and people's focus on just wanting to get everything in this dunya and not realize that this life is a narrow life and it's not about trying to bring in more and more of dunya, or whether it meant ضيق الدنيا, in other words, injustice. So in other words, we're here to also ensure fair distribution and in justice as well, whether we're speaking about ضيق الدنيا in terms of the different social dilemmas, or whether we're speaking about financial, economical, etc., political, etc. But in the end, just made it as a short explanation without needing to go in further details. That short explanation that I absolutely loved. I don't know why I brought this up. I forgot why I brought this up, but I think within our ayat right there, I know Tafsir al-Qurtubi didn't mention that one, but we're looking at how many times you would see, whether it's the disbelievers, or you would see, of course, those that want to go away from the right path, that they will create a narrative to delude the people into two of these areas. One, it's you look at either a figure or an idea or a way of life that they will somehow make it as if it's noble. And if you just go back in time, you look at the Pharaoh, for example, the Pharaoh was the figure that was considered as I guess the place, or that was I guess the symbol of what that civilization was centered around. And number two, you could see that looking at the words in the Quran, and even in the Egyptian writings, you could see that it was presenting that culture was what was going to give people the life, or what was going to give people the happiness that they were looking for, etc. And it's quite ironic that their focus, whether in their education or even in the effort that they were putting in, of course, their science, the studies, and all those different things, it was all to build for the pyramids. In other words, it was supposed to be something to I guess, pave for the hereafter. But it was, yes, the idea was right in general, that we are supposed to be paving for a good hereafter, and they were putting all the efforts, but definitely the hereafter they were looking for had gone wrong. And this is important to keep in mind, that there can be a general concept. A general concept is not enough to make something as right. And you could say that the general concept, for example, in freeing people from worshiping people, in the idea of democracy, for example, it's definitely sounding very attractive, that, hey, it's all about freeing people from having, a monarchy system, or probably from having one person that becomes the symbol of we should be centered around, or whatever, that it's all about freeing people from this kind of system to giving people the system. And that's also wrong, because people can go wrong in determining what is what is right and wrong in terms of principles, in terms of the definition of justice, all those different things. So you look at the two extremes. We're not just talking about a figure, but we're also talking about the people themselves. So taking out the figure is definitely good, but replacing it with a different figure, okay, that acts as another type of paganism and another type of worship without us realizing. So I know it's a little off of what I was intending probably to point out, maybe just a little off. Sorry, I got off track. Okay, but it's important just to see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was in the ayat, of course, was letting us get that inspiration, letting us get that mindset of how we understand our paths, how we understand what we were sent for, and at the same time, give that Muslim psychology to speak with pride, to speak with full power, to speak with better understanding of what you're really sent for, and that you carry the legacy of one, certainly freedom, because you're not worshiping other people. You're not worshiping thoughts, philosophies, whatever that philosophy was, but you're actually worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you're taking the demonstration, you're taking the details by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وقالوا لولا أنزل عليه ملك ولو أنزلنا ملكا لقضي بينهم. So let's continue right there. And we did talk about وقالوا لولا أنزل عليه ملك, and certainly that was I guess their suggestion that there would be an angel that would basically be sent, and that they would actually believe in that. But certainly, if the angel was sent, and if the angel was sent, then they would not be capable of seeing if it was sent. If this angel was sent in a shape of an angel, they would be too afraid to approach and embrace the message, because they would then come forward with the complaint that, well, he's an angel and we're created with a different nature, so why should we take his nature as something that inspires us as humans, because they're two different natures. So therefore, you cannot expect us to embrace something that is different from our nature, because they would approach us with a completely new narrative, or a new reason why they can't embrace this message. And if the angel was coming down in a shape of a human being, then they would still find a way to deny and basically say, well, this is an angel, this is not a human being just like us. In other words, a completely human nature. Therefore, لَلَبَسْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ مَا يَلْبِسُونَ. What is لَلَبَسْنَا? Is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the one that would bring in confusion? Or is it that if this angel was sent in a shape of a human being, and then this angel was actually giving them a message, showing them miracles, etc., is this going to be clearer, or is this going to add on to the confusion? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is right there letting us know that if the angel was sent in the shape of a human being, then that would not actually come in a fair demonstration of truth, because if the angel was coming in a shape of a human being, and basically to instruct the people of what the message that was sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is carrying, and how to apply it, etc., because that would actually bring in more confusion and not more clarity. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent the message with a human prophet, 100% entirely human prophet, in order to bring clarity and not add on to any confusion. Okay, so then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically say, وَلَلَبَسْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ مَا يَلْبِسُونَ. In other words, that if the angel was sent as a human shape, it would actually make it as something that brings in confusion and not necessarily clarity. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to give people the clarity, and that's why he basically sent the prophets in a shape of human beings in order to bring clarity to the people and to bring clarity to the words, to bring clarity on how we would apply the words, and basically to bring clarity to the people on how to demonstrate and put these two things together, the message and the application of the message, and certainly to make it clear for the people to see, to communicate with basically the prophets and the messengers in order to understand and apply and see and relate to in person with the message. وَلَقَدْ اسْتُهْزِئَ بِرُسُلٍ مِّن قَبْلِكَ. What were they mocking? Were they mocking the torments, or were they mocking the prophets? They were mocking everything that relates to the message. So what about اليحيق? So when we're looking at وحاق بهم ما كانوا به يستهزئون. What is يحيق? يحيق means that it basically was sent on to them. What? The torment. Why? Because they had denied the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Well, why is it when they deny the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punish them? Because at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created a purpose to this life. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this world in certain realities and truths. To go against, one, the laws that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created on earth, in this world, you're going to find that the nature itself would basically snap at you. In other words, it's a decree that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put within nature. Let's just say you wanted to claim that, no, I'm going to jump off the cliff, and you wanted to be stubborn and thought that you could force gravity to work in your interest. So you jump off the cliff. But of course, gravity is not going to change because you had wanted it to change. So what's going to happen? Well, you're going to fall, and it's going to be Humpty Dumpty. There you go. You're just going to basically break. That's it. Don't expect gravity to change in your favor. Don't expect nature to change in your favor. When you look at the principles in the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're talking about structures that are supposed to be bringing structure, whether on our social relations, financial, or even the way we would deal with the ecosystem, whatever it is, in each and every single way. And when we go against this system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created, then you're going against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So don't expect nature to somehow just be silent about it or just accept it. You're going to find, whether we're talking about the social dynamic, you go against what brings injustice, it's going to come back to you. Maybe in other religions, they would call it karma, okay? But in Islam, it would be basically that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically mentioned, just like in this ayah that was before it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically had said that what is it that they were basically here we go. حاق بهم ما كانوا به يستهزئون. Where is it? فقد كذبوا بالحق لما جاءهم فسوف يأتيهم أنباء ما كانوا به يستهزئون. Certainly, then it's going to be basically coming at them for the information, whatever they were mocking. It's going to come at them. They're going to see it. And you could see in another ayah, فَأَهْلَكْنَاهُمْ بِذُنُوبِهِمْ. They were destructed basically بِذُنُوبِهِم, for what they had wanted to what? Commit a sin against. They wanted to reject the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They thought that they could bend the truth, and that one day if they were to bend the truth, that truth would have no choice but to go in their favor and their interest. There's no way. Truth is never going to be bent for you. Not the social truth, and certainly not the political, and certainly not the textual, not the wahi. Nothing is going to bend for you. That's why in Islam it's bending for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's bowing down for the Lord Almighty in your aqidah, in your life, in your social life, in your financial life, in your private life, whatever it is. It's bending and bowing down for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you recognize that the truth, the world is not going to change for you. But you would have to recognize that you have to bow down for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we look at حاق بهم ما كانوا به يستهزئون, it's basically right there. الحاقة, you could see the word, just the word حاقة. حاقة can mean that it was sent down, but حاقة can also mean to surround. When you look at the ayah, ولا يحيق المكر السيء إلا بأهله, what does that mean? Every single evil plot, it would come back onto the person that had plotted and made this plot. It will come back to them. And what does it mean? That there's a law that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. All your actions are basically going to be the force that is going to determine not only your future, but your present as well. So whatever you had done in the past is going to determine your future. Just keep that one in mind. Whatever you had done in the past, it's going to determine your future, and it keeps going. We're not just talking about the nearby future, but we're also going to talk about the future in the hereafter. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he says, وَلَا يَحِيقُ الْمَكْرُ السَّيِّئِ, every single evil plot is going to come back to you. There's no way that it will be delayed. It's just an issue of time. But at the end, whether it's a plot, whether it's a plan, whether it's a sin, it's going to come back to you in different shapes and different forms. Might have harmed a child one day, it's going to come back to you. And we could see it regardless whether the person is Muslim or not Muslim, it's going to come back to you. Regardless. And this is really scary when you look at that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically lets us know وَلَا يَحِيقُ الْمَكْرُ السَّيِّئُ إِلَّا بِأَهْلِهِ, and how this ayah is basically that يَحِيقُ, it surrounds. In other words, you can't think that you can get out of this chain and this line of decree that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created that surrounds you. Just as you cannot get out of the laws that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created in the universe, in nature, you can't get out of the laws that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in your social dynamic, or probably the food, or probably the life system that you're living in. There's no way. Each and every single system is connected to the other system, and therefore it surrounds you from all angles. And don't expect that you can somehow get away with it. You can't get away with it. That's what it means. يحيق. يحيق just means you cannot get away with it. It's going to come back to you, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala surrounds you by his decree from all angles. And if you were to think that somehow you can get away with it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that all the system was created by him, and don't expect that the system is going to bend for you. It won't. You only have one option, which is to bend for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Layla Ali, you wanted to say something, dear. Go ahead.
A lot of times, like, is this referring to like zina? They say like if you commit zina, it's always gonna like follow you and generate, like it's gonna stay in your like family or something, or it's gonna come back to you. And then my other question is, what are like forgiveness? Like if you ask for forgiveness, like is like
So
remorse, like
No,
remorse?
so that's why we make the dua. Good question, Layla. That's why we make the dua, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not hold us accountable for our sins, and basically to give us all al-afu and as-safh. Because look at this word, فَأَهْلَكْنَاهُمْ بِذُنُوبِهِمْ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their sins were basically, think of it as the momentum that later starts getting into having its implication, its effect, its hardship, its influence in different ways, and its basically destruction on them. There's going to be that. But here's a question, that someone might ask. How is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that إن الله إذا أحب المؤمن ابتلاه? And look at these, فأهلكناهم بذنوبهم. How do you put these two quotes together? How is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that these people were destructed because of the sins that they had committed? And at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Allah, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves a believer, then he would basically give them ibtila, or hardships. Wait a minute. So what's the difference between الهلاك and الابتلاء? Those are two key words. الابتلاء, there are two kinds of ibtila. الابتلاء can mean certainly hardship. That's the general meaning. But الابتلاء can be a test, just a general test. A general test, but the person can either fall this general test and basically let it break them or make them. That test can either break you or make you. Can either break you in this test, maybe, hey, you lost your job. Okay. And when you lost your job, you basically, hey, were struggling to pay your bills, probably rent, whatever it is, and your husband. And of course, whenever there's an unemployment happening within the home, it doesn't just affect them financially, but then the husband, hey, you're wasting money. And the wife is like, I'm actually on a budget. I'm taking the budget seriously. But when you guys are hungry, I have to figure something out. And if I don't have these ingredients, then I won't be able to cook. And then he's basically coming in with these accusations. She's trying to figure it out. He doesn't know how much effort she's trying to basically make up for the missing ingredients and all of that. So she's having her struggle, he's having his struggle, and the kids are having their struggle, and it becomes everybody's at each other's throats. And it all started out with basically that unemployment, for example. And it continues. Well, it wasn't just the bills, but it was the food, it was the clothes, it was the social relations. It was now affecting them psychologically. The list goes on and on. This is an ibtila. It could either break them. That's why you would have the probability of divorce rates basically going up when unemployment happens, when an illness, or probably when there is a disabled child in the family. We're talking about real studies here telling us that divorce rates are higher in their chances in situations like that than in other situations. This is one. It can break them, or it can make them. Maybe we need to figure out different ways. We're going to support one another. No, this is something biqadarillah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that gives the rizq. Don't worry. The wife, the good wife, tells her husband, don't worry. It's okay. We're going to be patient in making this. I'll figure out using simple ingredients instead of probably getting into the protein, which is more expensive. I'll probably, just for the time being, maybe make up different kinds of proteins. I don't know, use garbanzo beans instead of meat, for example, to maybe, yes, it's not like I'm replacing this ingredient with that, but I'll use a different kind of protein instead of the more expensive protein, or maybe I'll use, yes, certainly different kinds of ingredients that we can afford, or probably smaller home. Yes, it's going to be a little tighter, but inshallah, we'll figure this out. Yes, the husband is uptight, but inshallah, I'll whenever he's angry, I'll just, reduce from my complaints. I'll reduce from me maybe talking back, just to embrace all of this. That's what a salihah wife would do. فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ. I won't discuss it. I won't tell anybody about it. So what is she? She's basically trying to contain the situation, because it's definitely hard on the man to feel that he is not capable of being the breadwinner, of being the person to make the right decisions, etc. So it becomes really hard on both. It can make them, and it can get them into a different level of empowerment. What kind of empowerment? That they would hold on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That they would not blame one another for this, but would consider every single time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a razaq. They would consider that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that is capable of changing the situation. That they would basically, instead of accusing one another, they would now redirect this pain that they're going through in considering that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, everything is in his hands. Redirecting their focus from seeing pain, from seeing loss, to seeing there's a gain that we need to look for, which is our iman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala closed the door of rizq on us, but he'll open the door of another rizq. The rizq of iman, the rizq of connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now this is what will make them. What is it making out of them? It's making out of them al-mu'min. In Allah, إِذَا أَحَبَّ الْمُؤْمِنِ ابْتَلَى. It's an ibtila. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is even calling it an ibtila. He's even calling it as a hardship. He's calling it by its name, that it's a struggle. It's an ibtila, it's a struggle. But if a mu'min would encounter the struggle, a mu'min would take this struggle as something to make them. But a disbeliever or a person of sin, their past history, when they encounter this struggle, it will break them, because they won't see in it. They were not training their mind to see this struggle as a struggle to make them, but it will be something that, think of this. اخشوشنوا فإن النعم لا تدوم. What does that mean? Train yourself on how to live in lack of entertainment, in lack of resources, because resources will not always last. But the word ikhshawshana or ikhshawshin comes from the root khashana. What is that? Khashana is when something is rough. So this إخشوشنوا, I can't remember if it's a hadith or Umar ibn al-Khattab saying it, so I'll go back to that one and actually look into it. But when you look into that إخشوشنا, it's you training yourself, especially that we're definitely, with all of the new world system changing, there's definitely going to be a lot of hardship on everyone. Expect that things are going to be tougher. Teach your children not everything that you want you got to get. Not everything that you would want necessarily have to be as what you would like, and good food and entertainment and the resources being available. Sometimes practice on not making those resources available and training your children that not every single resource that you would want available is necessarily there. Let's see, with the lack of resource, how we can make things work out with these resources. You don't have this resource. What are you going to do? And this is key, because the more resources available, the less commitment and perseverance we'll basically have. The less resources available, our nature and our instinct to basically survive, it goes stronger when the resources are not available. When fear is there, that's the strongest motivation that we have as human beings. That's why when you're in fear, your adrenaline works in ways to make you do things that you never thought you had the power to do. It's fear. Fear makes you do things that you did not expect you had the power to do. And just keep that one in mind. And إخشوشنوا فإن النعمة, it was Umar ibn Khattab. Okay. So إخشوشنوا was basically that wording to tell us فإن النعمة لا تدوم. Just train yourself how to live the rough life with the lack of resources, because when you don't have these resources, then you already had done the training in the past. When you had done that training in the past, whenever an ibtila happens, you had already trained for it. That's why even in the army, what do they make them do? They make them run, they make them go through heat, they make them go through the pressure, speed, yelling, etc. Why are they doing all of that? It's basically to build in them that exposure to harsh environments and to be prepared for it. Because if you are trained in harsh environments, when the actual hardship happens, you are more likely, after training your brain, you are more likely to basically excel and surpass that challenge, because you had already trained your brain on how to go beyond the challenge. You had trained it. And that's the same thing. We're not just speaking about physical training in army, but we could see that every training that people go through, it basically comes and pays off when the real event and when the real hardship happens, whether it's training in the army, or whether it's training at work, or whether it's training at home, or the list goes on and on. And that's why, ladies, I know that sometimes the deprivation that we probably lived in our childhood, it makes us want to give our children more and more. In order to let them feel that they had it, because we don't want to deprive our children and let them feel what we had felt because it was painful that, hey, I wanted that ice cream so bad, but we couldn't afford to get that ice cream. It was always my dream to get this kind of bike, but I couldn't get it because we couldn't afford it. It was always my dream to get this and get that, but we couldn't because my father didn't have the income to buy us this and that. And then many times without us realizing, if we're always providing for our children, that's why we could see the modern illness that our children are right now going through is the feeling of entitlement, thinking that whatever they want, that they should get and not put the effort to get it. And what that created in their psychology is the entitlement, and therefore everything is supposed to be provided for them by default, and not that they have to put the effort. That feeling of entitlement, I would say it's an illness. But if you compare the past, you compare how our ancestors, because of the fear, because of the struggle, because of all of that, you compare the children were doing adult efforts. They were wise as adults, even in their early childhood. They were taking care of their brothers and sisters. They were basically acting as full-grown adults because they were more mature. What enhanced that maturity? What enhanced that maturity is the rough life, is the life of feeling in danger, is the life of feeling the sorrow, is the life of toughness, etc. That life is that life that can make you or break you. And this is I love that she said that you occasionally sleep on the floor. That was one thing that the Salihin sometimes would do. They would say, well, we would have to sleep on the floor just to train ourselves, just to let our bodies get into this training that you don't have to always get it. And sometimes eating hard bread, for example, maybe leftover foods, does it always have to be fresh and all of that? And if you don't like it, well, now this is your day to eat leftover foods because you never know what happens. And let them enjoy it. Let them feel that, okay, let's see what you could do, and let's see how long you could survive if you basically went through the struggle. Let them see, and if you can do even farther, maybe go to refugee camps, maybe see how their life is like at refugee camps, or maybe back home in your country, Somalia, Afghanistan, wherever you come from. Maybe go to these areas and let their children see how privileged they are to have the life that they're having and not live this entitlement. And for us ourselves, even see, sometimes we would take it for granted and not realize that we are so lucky to have the life that we're having. And that's basically connecting it with the hadith that إن الله إذا أحب المؤمن ابتلاه. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves a believer, closes the different doors of dunya on them in order to keep one door, which is the door to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the door to La ilaha illallah, the door not connecting to dunya, but the door to connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So connecting that فَأَهْلَكْنَاهُمْ بِذُنُوبِهِمْ, what happens is that when you see the disbelievers, they would hold on to the dunya, and they would then feel that mental illness. That mental illness is basically going to be an inevitable consequence for those that basically had always just put their faith in their own selves, put their faith in their dunya. And when it fails on them, that's when they go into depression. That's when they go into anxiety. That's when they would feel that their body failed them. That's when they would feel that the people failed them, and etc. And that's الهلاك بالذنوب. What is الهلاك? The word halaka. The word halaka can mean to destruct. The word halaka can also mean to get emptied of something. okay, to get emptied of energy, to get emptied of motivation. When we say, or even when we say emptied of motivation, we're talking about helpless or hopeless even. So when you look at أهلكناهم بذنوبهم, what are we looking at? That they also, the sins that they were living in, and usually if you see the correlation between sin, a lot of the correlation between sin and entertainment is seen in the different instructions that the Prophet ﷺ or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically give us. So if you look at zina, what is zina? It's a form of entertainment. What is khamr? It's a form of entertainment. What is sariqa? It's seeking a form or seeking the resource for entertainment. You look at every sin and it basically becomes, well, the person is seeking more of dunya, is seeking more of entertainment. Okay, you look at each and every single one. But what happens when you look at أهلكناهم بذنوبهم? You could see that this used to be a place of entertainment, but this place of entertainment became this place of their emptiness. Al-halak is when one is empty of motivation, when one is empty of feeling that they have the power, when one is basically destructed, they're empty of any life and they become destructed, empty of any power. That's al-halak. And that's why we would look at any halak, any type of halak, it basically becomes empty of any energy, of any power, of any motivation, all of that. And that is as a result of them. Just keep that one in mind. That's why we're connecting between make you or break you, and between dhanb, and between إن الله إذا حب المؤمن ابتلاه, and with al-ibtila, a mu'min looks at al-ma'asiyah and looks at dhanb as not something that will make you, but as something that will break you. You see the correlation here? That dhanb, no, I don't see it as a place of power, but I see it as a place of weakness. It will weaken me. And that's why, look at that ikhshawshinu. Train yourself to stay away from that entertainment, from the resources, because that's going to strengthen you and empower you. When dunya becomes available to you, you learn how to create the stamina, you learn how to create the grit, and you learn how to create the perseverance and commitment in the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see that? And that's what makes al-mu'min. That's what makes the believer to basically stay strong, whether a mockery comes at their face or whether it's basically the dunya opening at them. They would say, well, let's see what happens. Now, let's go for the rest of the ayat right there. I love that, I believe Zainab right there, she sent me عن قتادة قال سمعت أبا عثمان النهدي قال أتانا كتاب عمر ونحن بأذربيجان مع عتبة بن فرقد أما بعد فاتزروا وارتدوا وانتعلوا وارموا بالخفاف واقطعوا السراويلات، okay. وعليكم بلباس أبيكم إسماعيل وإياكم والتنعم وزي العجم وعليكم بالشمس فإنها حمام العرب واخشوشنوا واخلوا لقوا وارموا الأغراض وانزوا نزوا والنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم نهانا عن الحرير إلا هكذا. Okay, so basically I'll translate that one. Okay, sorry, but right now I'm actually going through my eyes not seeing very well. I get this often. All of a sudden my eyes would start getting these floaters and I can't see. So half the words I'm seeing in them and half the words are not. This is, it happens to be every once in a while. Don't get worried, inshallah, alhamdulillah, it's just before a migraine happens. Okay. So basically Umar ibn al-Khattab was sending a message to the people in Azerbaijan. Okay. What was he telling them? Basically, to wear the simple clothing and basically not to depend on the type of shoes that were basically the rough shoes. In other words, you got to train yourself to be basically to be in different hard circumstances, and beware of the clothing and the attire of al-Ajam. Basically, the al-Ajam are basically not the Arab. In other words, sophisticated clothes, and just learn how to be under the sun. That way you'll be under heat, in other words, and just make sure that you live under and put yourself under different hard circumstances in order to keep you strong. Okay. Let's go ahead with right there. So I guess we were just focusing on the word yahiqu and how is that related to what we're talking about. وَلَا يَحِقُ الْمَكْرُ السَّيْءُ إِلَّا بِأَهْلِهِ. And certainly, how is that related to the sins and what really happens? So things will come back to you, and certainly in different ways that you would not expect. Okay. قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ ثُمَّ انظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ. Okay, so here's the thing. When we say قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْض, was this telling us, or was this telling the Prophet ﷺ to tell the believers and the disbelievers, or who was it directed at to tell them go and navigate on earth and so forth? This was actually directed at the disbelievers. So what is the ruling on tourism? Maybe wanted to go and probably go on a tourist trip, maybe to Spain, or maybe the Eiffel Towers, etc. Scholars had differences of opinions on such kind of tourism. Let's see. The first opinion, going on to tourism is haram. That's the first opinion. And in that first opinion, they said, because the Prophet ﷺ said that that the only traveling that is permitted is either for seeking ilm or for going to Mecca or Medina or Masjid al-Aqsa. And where did they get that from? Well, the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith basically said that that migrating, in the hadith quote, okay, that migrating would only be permitted for these places. Now, that was the first opinion. Okay. The second opinion, they said, well, not quite, that it's not permissible. It depends on the motive. So if the motive was to seek ilm or to seek ibrah. What is ibrah? Ibrah is to seek the wisdom, to seek maw'idha, to seek a reminder, to perhaps maybe go to Egypt and probably see the pharaohs and how they did their civilization. But you want to remember that all those areas that had, let's say, a civilization, whether it's Ula in Saudi Arabia, or whether it's the pyramids in Egypt, or the Aztecs in South America, or whatever, that when you pass by those areas, the sunnah is to be in tears passing by those areas. What if I cannot cry? I can't, I'm not in tears. I don't know how to cry about this. The Prophet ﷺ was teaching us tabaka, fake the tears, live the tears, make it as if you are crying. Why? Because it is to get you into the mood of realizing that there is a system. If these people had disbelieved in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is how their civilization ended. Same thing. That this system will not change for you. That this system is what you have to recognize is what resembles the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where were these people? How did the civilization and all the efforts that they had contributed in making the civilization all of a sudden, where did they go? How did they just all of the sudden disappear? They were there, now they're fully gone. Why? How? Where? All these questions. Well, that's to let us at that moment embrace the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it is beyond every civilization and certainly beyond you. So you would take the moment to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the second opinion. The second opinion basically considered, well, just like this ayah, قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ ثُمَّ انظُرُوا. They said, well, here it is. The ayah was saying, navigate on earth. So whether we're navigating for maybe better income, or whether for طلب العلم, for seeking knowledge and studying, or whether we're navigating because we're trying to find the good موعظة, trying to find the good remembrance, trying to see how people are living in poverty or how people are living in their experiences, and how, just navigating basically to learn cultures, to learn civilizations, to see the beauty of nature. And there's no way that you could see the beauty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in nature, which resembles Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power, unless you were actually traveling. But of course, there are certain restrictions for that second opinion. The second opinion was saying, yes, definitely, it is number one. That's when they would go in differences of opinions. They said, number one is that it has to be basically within the regulations. Number one, regulations that the person is navigating areas that are halal to navigate. So it's not that the person, for example, going to Florida and beaches and swimming on beaches with naked women there, because that would be a haram area to visit, seeing people that are probably not dressed properly. Or, yeah, well, what would be the ruling then? Then it would be impermissible. Okay, so in other words, they were looking at certainly that this travel, if you had the money, it has to be with something that brings you an increase in faith, whether you're going to see different things in nature, maybe learn more about people's experiences, learn more about people, learn more about how to do da'wah, maybe get better income, maybe get better ilm, etc., that those would be permissible. Okay, so that's different than the first one. The first one saying, no, they would only travel for three things. The second opinion said, no, there are different reasons to travel, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَامْشُوا فِي مَنَاكِبِهَا. So here we go. To get a better income, maybe. I heard that if I were to travel to this country, there are better employment opportunities, or probably getting better opportunities for healthcare, etc., that I'm traveling this. So then the second opinion added another regulation, a very important regulation, which is, are we speaking about migrating or going to another country? What if the danger was going to be on our deen? Okay, like what? Like, for example, being in a non-Muslim country. Okay, being in a non-Muslim country, are we supposed to be doing hijrah? Well, hijrah, for the name hijrah, لا هجرة بعد الفتح. There's no hijrah after the conquering of Mecca, period. The conquering of Mecca, which is 8th year hijrah. Okay. Before, there was this classification they would call to bilad, basically al-harb, dar al-harb, or dar al-Islam. There was this classification. It's dar al-harb, the place of war, and therefore that was considered as a non-Muslim place. And the other one was Dar al-Islam, was the house of Islam. Okay, in other words, a Muslim country that ruled by Islam. But that actually applied to a certain historical context back then. At the time, there was a body of Muslim countries that supported and practiced Islam, and there was a body of a non-Muslim area that didn't practice Islam. So at the time, the fiqh was based on the context that basically had induced that classification that suited at that time. But during our times, the situation is completely different. Therefore, the classification of dar harb, dar Islam, it doesn't apply with the context that we're living in today. Because we are seeing that in certain areas and for certain people, we could see we might have more freedom in practicing Islam in non-Muslim countries, in Western countries, than actually in Muslim countries. You would see that Muslims might actually be in danger, probably in Egypt, and they would be safe to write, safe to say, and of course, and even be safe to openly disclose their political views, probably in UK. And you would definitely see that in Muslim countries, they wouldn't be capable of doing so. Now, there are a number of different reasons why this is the case, and you want to remember that this isn't because Muslims themselves are basically with their nature that they're just evil, that they can't even handle any of this. No, it's a different story of colonization, basically policing in the countries that they colonized. And right now, of course, within their area, they wouldn't apply the same policing. So if you are an American citizen or a British citizen, for example, living on their soil, hey, you probably get the same laws because they don't want to be hypocritical. So you could probably get away with those laws that they would apply on their soil. But certainly if you were outside, it would be a different story. Okay. Allah al-Musta'an. All right. So therefore, I would say for those that are in other countries, I don't encourage at all staying in non-Muslim countries like you would say, but I would say every single situation has its context. And I would always say, look into the context, but as well as looking into the context, make sure you're prioritizing your faith, your children's faith, because that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was always teaching us to look into as our priority, because الدنيا النعم لا تدوم. It's not going to be there forever. So make sure you hold on to al-akhirah and not the dunya. And make sure when you want to judge, is this better for me? Or is this country better for me or not better for me? It's to help you basically judge based on the standard. Is this better for my deen or not? قل سيروا في الأرض, just wanted to mention that one. قل سيروا في الأرض, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, tell the people basically that are making a mockery of Islam, well, let them navigate on earth in order for you to basically see what happened to those that had denied it before you, whether the torments or whether the punishment. And he said, السفر مندوب إليه. Said in this safar, in regards to the Muslims, this is mandubun ilay, meaning it is recommended to basically navigate those areas and see what happened to those areas. So here he's saying mandubun ilay. Okay, and who are the people that denied in this? They're basically كذب الحق وأهله, that denied the truth, and the people that basically had embraced the truth. Okay, and he said لا من كذب بالباطل. So this, okay, what's the difference? والمكذبون هنا من كذب الحق وأهله لا من كذب بالباطل. Okay, so this is in order to say this isn't, are we kafir? Yes, we are. Wait, what? We're kafir too? Yeah. Kafir of what? Kafir in what they believe in. where I'm kafir in atheism, I'm kafir in Christianity, I'm kafir in Buddhism, and they are kafir of Islam. So here, this is basically what he's trying to say, that this is directed at the people that had basically denied truth. This isn't talking about those that denied falsehood. Okay, so this is basically what that quote is saying. قل لمن ما في السماوات والأرض, and say, O Muhammad, who basically is the owner of samawat, or the heavens and earth. And since he is the creator of all, then therefore he is capable of bringing torments to them, and therefore determining the decree of what happens if they were to deny the Lord Almighty, and he's capable of resurrecting them after death. But the Lord Almighty had decreed mercy upon himself to give you the chance, basically, and this would be al-isti'tafu min. So this is basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing them that mercy, showing them that he is opening his arms, metaphorically, of course, to the disbelievers, and basically giving them the opportunity to seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. But will they run to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So this is إخبار منه سبحانه بأنه رحيم بعباده. This is giving them the information that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all merciful on his servants, and he's not rushing and expediting basically the torments. So in the end, the Prophet ﷺ had basically said, لما قضى الله الخلق قضى الله الخلق كتب في كتاب على نفسه فهو موضوع عنده إن رحمتي تغلب غضبي. That the Prophet ﷺ had said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a book, documented this note. إن رحمتي تغلب غضبي. My mercy overcomes my anger, passes it. أي تسبقه وتزيد عليه. In other words, it passes it and exceeds it, and basically comes prior to the anger. لا يجمعنكم. There's one, we'll stop right here, inshallah, for the tafsir. If there are any questions, inshallah, we'll be able to answer that. Let's see, some sisters say they want to travel the world and learn other cultures to apply this ayah. Like I said, it depends. It depends on the intention, okay? But it has to be with ilm, and definitely with the right regulations. So I think I commented on that one. Say to those jokes to travel and see what happens to the disbelievers. But isn't that make the act as disbelievers? I'm not sure I'm understanding what you're saying, dear. If there are any questions, before we sign off, I'd be happy to, you would like to unmute, that's okay too. Is karma in Islam? Okay, so yes and no. Let me explain it. Karma in the Eastern religions, okay, what they consider, it comes from the idea that nature itself basically has built-in power, and it basically is God. It acts, even though, yes, they don't believe in God, but they would give the power to nature that it acts. If you look into the literature and their wordings in how they talk about karma, well, that's because they consider that nature is the power, and if you look into it, they would see as if it's a divine power in nature. Okay, and that the energy within nature, that basically is what recognizes what you're doing, and therefore that karma comes back to you and all of that. And that in itself is kufr, to believe that nature is basically God. Okay. But in one angle, okay, yes, we do definitely, that's kufr to believe that nature is God and that nature basically has its own force to act, and that there's no God to basically determine how these forces happen. So in that sense, that's plain kufr. No doubt about that. And speaking of karma, that's coming from a completely kufr stance, this kind of energy in the universe and all of that. But to believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the force, the power within nature, and basically works within controlling nature, etc., and it comes back to you and without you realizing, then from that angle, this definitely is what Islam is saying. So that's why I said yes and no. So if you are to believe that karma, based on their aqidah, that it's just nature basically doing the job and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not the one that's doing that, that's kufr. But if one believes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is controlling things in nature and his decree is what control things in nature, and that, yes, certain things, whether it's the flood that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring, or probably earthquakes, or probably your life, illness, etc., happening to you, and that it's basically for a sin. أهلكناهم بذنوبهم. So if you were to look at أهلكناهم بذنوبهم in practice, that's kind of like saying karma. Okay, but it's not based on how they would understand and not based on their aqidah, but it's that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the force. Because of whatever they had done, he is the one to let this basically come back to them in different ways, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not let them get away with it. It will come back to them. So that's why I'm explaining that yes and no. Did I explain that, my dear?
Yes, I was just like referring to the ahakam, where you said like someone can't get away with evil. But yeah, that explained it right. So does this mean like when someone said, I got my, yeah, you leave it to Allah, you'll get your haq, like that?
Well, yes and no, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not ask you to just stand there and be subject to abuse and just wait for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to save you. No, he said you have to do your form of jihad. You have to do your form of seeking justice. You have to do your form of amr bil ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar. You have to do your contribution to basically, whether it's to bring rizq, or whether it's to bring justice, or whether it's to end oppression, or whether it's to end poverty, whatever it is. Don't expect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do it for you. You have to put in your investment, whether it's stopping oppression, or whether it's ending poverty, or whether it's somehow trying to stop the illness or seek healing. You have to put in your effort, but just know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it available. The opportunity is there, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you the keys to an opportunity, but you have to hold the key. You have to use the key to open up the door of justice, open up the door of rizq, open up the door of ilm, you have to use the key. Don't expect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring it for you. But then once you get a hold on to the key, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will then give you the inspiration and the power to open and use the key, whether the key to ilm, the key to victory, the key to power, the key, or whatever it is. You have to use the key. There is a key to all of those, but you have to learn how to use it. You have to train. You have to also hold on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He will give you the key and the inspiration and the power to basically be able to open those locked places. So I hope I answered the question. Any other questions? So this is it, inshallah. Sorry.